Have you ever wondered if you could make animations on your mobile phone or your tablet? Well, there's an app out there for you. It's called Flipaclip. Some of you may have known it for this video since you're not new to the app. But for those of you who are and are seeking to improve your skills, you may find this video very helpful. And with that said, let's get into it. Good day everyone, and today I'm back with another tutorial video, and just like the previous one, today we'll be continuing our discussion on how you make your animation, and this time around we'll be focusing on the outline. So I call this particular one the outline layer. Now if you noticed the sketch I have here, it's a little bit different from what I made previously. I've decided to go over it and then edit the character to make her look a little much more childish. It will be bad for me to explain to you how labor intensive animation is and then chicken out of actually making adjustments. So today we'll be focusing on the outline, and to start that we create another layer, the third layer in this case, and we call it the outline. Yeah. So at this point you can delete your rough layer in case you are just trying to manage space. I believe that people who don't have the fully paid version of Flipaclip might not have all the layers accessible to them. I don't know if that has changed, but given that we are a little bit, let's just work with the premise that we are limited with layers now. So now we have two layers. Let's work on this. And just like we did with our rough layer, for the sketch layer, let's turn down the opacity a little bit, and then at this point I will go to the onion skin and switch off the frames after. Now what we want to do now is that we are going to go over the lines that is in the sketch layer. So this is really just an easy part of Flipaclip. There's really not much to say about your outline layer. It's just basically you drawing over your sketch and just tracing it and avoiding the mistakes you've made on your sketch layer. So when it comes to actually drawing your outline layer, there's something I need to tell you about zooming in to get in the details. The more you zoom in when you are tracing, the more accurate your strokes tend to be. But when you zoom out, it becomes a little bit difficult to actually draw on the lines of your sketch. So if you are particularly talented and you are gifted and you have very steady hands, it's advisable to zoom in as less as possible because it saves you time. Now the reason why I'm saying this is that when you zoom into your canvas, it increases the travel distance of your lines in such a way that outside your actual screen, you have to travel from here to here. But let's say, okay, let me just put it this way because it's becoming a little bit difficult for me to explain. Let's say I want to draw a line from this point to this point. Now if it is zoomed out like this, it will take me a very short amount of time to draw it to this point, but then I lose precision. So this is faster to draw but less precise. Now, but let's say I zoom in and I want to make my hands more steady. Now look at it. I have to travel that exact same distance almost 4 times, which means it takes more time. Now this is slower but more precise. Now if you are a particularly skilled animator and you have very steady hands, if you feel that you can draw this without having to zoom in, it's going to save you more time. But if you're someone that lacks steady hand, it's better for you to just zoom in and actually trace your sketch layer. So look at this, I'm actually having difficulty drawing it. Sometimes it even takes more time when you try to draw this way if you don't have very steady hands, because you are moving very slowly in order to avoid drawing outside the lines. So usually I just zoom in because I realize I'm faster when I zoom in. But if you're someone that has very steady hands and have no need for zooming in, you can even be much more faster than this. Now another thing about your outline is switching on your pressure sensitivity. Now the way I'm drawing with my tablet now, I have the pressure sensitivity on, meaning that if I put more pressure into my lines, it's thicker, and if I put less pressure, it is lighter. Now the reason why this is beneficial is that when your lines are uneven, there is an artistic feeling to it that makes it look much more dynamic and diverse to the eyes, rather than just having very consistent line all through. Now this is all down to preference. If you prefer having a very consistent line, then you can switch off your pressure sensitivity. I think if you want to switch that off, you come over here to your app settings and come to your stylus pressure. So you can switch it off and you can switch it on. So it's not really that difficult. Another thing I like to do when I'm drawing my outlines is outrightly just filling spots that I intend to make black, just like the lines. I don't need to shade or apply any shadow. So I will just go ahead and fill these two parts, since I want to make the eyelashes black and I want to make the eyebrows black as well. All right. So I'm just going to copy my outline over to the other frames, put it there and over. Yeah. Now we're in the next frame, but as you can see, we have a problem, but it's not necessarily a problem once you know how to go about it. Right now, our onion skin is much more vivid than our sketch layer. Now, just like I said in the previous tutorial video, you need to have a very good eye for things like this to be able to differentiate easily between your sketch, your previous frames, your next frames, and what you are actually currently working on. So what I like to do when I'm drawing this is that I generally want to make my onion skin, the frames before, look less visible than the sketch. So I'm going to come here and reduce its opacity. So yeah, now it's okay for me. So you just have to figure out what works best for you in this case. And another thing to note is that when you're animating, especially on Flipaclip, you want to make sure that all your lines are closed. What do I mean by closed? This is going to come back when I'm explaining how to actually paint faster on Flipaclip. So you want to close every of your lines and every segment of a different color. For instance, this is the head. If I'm going to paint the head a different color from the hair, I want to keep everything in the head, all the lines in the head closed in such a way that there is no opening, so that when I use the bucket tool to fill colors into it, it's not going to splash out of the part I intend to paint. So as you can see, I'm closing all the all these tiny spaces between my lines. Now if you look at this head, for instance, all the outlines for the head is already closed. There is no opening anywhere, which means if I fill it with color, it's not going to splash out. But let's say that I accidentally leave an opening somewhere here, it's going to become an issue when it comes to painting. So that's basically what I'm trying to say. So over here, when you are doing your outline, you can add the final details that you didn't add in your sketch layer. This is your last chance to go over the details. Now you can see I'm already adding eyelashes to the eyes, even though I didn't add it in the sketch layer. As you can see, I'm trying my best to keep the hairlines consistent. I noticed that it became a little bit lower in my sketch layer, so I'm making those adjustments in my outline layer. So your outline is basically like your last chance to make adjustments to the proportions and the forms and details of your character. And also, because you are just outrightly tracing it, you're tracing over your sketch, you don't really need to start anywhere. You can just start anywhere that suits you or anywhere that is much more convenient for you. And that's what I'm doing right now. So now that I'm done with the outlines, the next step is to start with our shadows. Now there are two ways to go about it. Usually there are some people that decide to color first and then add the shadows later, but I personally prefer adding the shadows first and then coloring later. Now I'm going to create another new layer and name this layer shadow. I actually thought I was going to cover colors in this tutorial video because outline is pretty much straightforward and you don't really need too much details on that after you know how to go about your sketch. But then I guess I'll have to cover colors in the next tutorial video. So today, let's just focus on the shadows. Now when I make my shadows, the first thing I also do, just like I've done with my previous drawings, is to lower the opacity. And let's just put it at a reasonable, maybe 36%. And what I do after that is to increase the size of my pen to around 4. Now let me just disable the sketch outline so that I can have less details to focus on. And let me trace my shadow. Now some people would prefer to draw their shadows after painting and then just do it over the colors and everything. But the reason why I don't do that is because in case there's a need for me to make corrections, it's going to be easier for me to just do it on a different layer. So now when we want to make our shadow, we have to take note of our light source. For the sake of convenience, let me just imagine that the light source is coming from the top right. So let's cast our shadows that way. Now, another problem that you usually encounter when you're making shadows is because you may not know where the starting and ending lines of your shadows are. So when you want to use the bucket or the fill tool to fill it up, you might end up just filling the whole screen. So you have to keep track of where your lines are when you're making shadows. And then if you've noticed some of my animations in the past, you notice there are some places that I always tend to put my shadows. Now there are cases where I exempt myself from putting it, but usually I put shadows around the grooves of the eye, the eyelid. Then I put shadows under the nose, and sometimes I use my shadow to highlight the lips and make it more different, like usually the upper lip. I prefer to add shadows to the upper lip to give you some form of difference, and then I had a little bit of shadow around the lower lip. So knowing where to apply your shadow is something that you can learn, but the more you draw, the more experience you gather when it comes to making your shadows. Another thing to note is that since animation is quite different from drawing lifelike drawings, there's not necessarily need for you to be 100% accurate with your shadows. Most times you have to go more for something that is much more visually appealing than sticking to the rules. So but then again, it's important for you to also know the rules of shading and everything. So I'm just going to have to copy. Let me first get rid of this, then copy, paste. So take note of your onion skin to know the position of your previous shadow, and now you're going to make everything look professional and appealing. So usually for parts that are not moving, you just want to retrace the shadow over it again, exactly the way it is in the previous frame. But for parts that are moving, you add your shadows to the desired point. Let me just make a little bit of adjustment here, because in the previous frame parts of the hair were still very visible, but it just suddenly became dark. So in order to make it transition smoothly, let me just add some parts, some white parts there. So making adjustments like that are things that just come with experience. The more you practice your animation, the better you get. You always have to have it in the back of your mind that animation is a very time-consuming job, and you can't just give up very easily. You have to strive and just do your best to get your motivation going. And even when you get tired, you just have to try your best to just get your work done. because motivation can only take you so far. It gets to a point where you lose all your motivation and you just have to pull through. So never give up. Okay, it also occurred to me that there are different ways to achieve shading in your characters. I can, as I'm drawing right now, I just realized that there are like 3 different ways at which it can be achieved. But the reason why I'm using this method is because, as far as I've been animating, I've discovered that this is by far the easiest method when it comes to making your shading, because not only is it easy for you to make your corrections if you've made any mistakes, just the way I did in the previous frame that I had to adjust the hair, but when it also comes to you putting in your fill tool, it's actually very easy. And I'm going to show you, after I'm done with this, why that's the case. I'll show you a different method of shading, and then you can decide for yourself which one you'd like to follow. So now there you have it. We've completed our shading. Now that we've already done this, there's still another way you can go about your shading. I personally do not prefer this, but it's a method I've delved in the past. So what you want to do in this shading method is that you want to first duplicate your layer. But before I go into that shading method, I just realized something in this my current tutorial video. I made a mistake, or should I say an oversight. So the other method of shading, what you want to do is that, let me first switch off this shadow outline. You come to your outline. So once you click on it, you duplicate it. Now after duplicating this layer becomes your shadows. So just to make it different, let me just write outline shadows. So now we have the shadow and we have the outline. So once you switch off this outline and just focus on these outline shadows. So by doing so, we're now going to make our shading. No, what we want to do is that we're going to switch on our outline, and then this outline shadows, we're going to reduce the opacity to, let's say 36%. Was it? Yeah, 36. Now that we have it in 36%, we now want to go over our outlines. But the difference in this one is that, unlike the previous one where I have to draw the whole lines, follow the outline and just trace it, since the outline is already here, I can just fill my shadow straight up to this line without having to go through the whole process of tracing the outlines again. Now you see, if I just draw within these lines, do this like this, and fill it, it's already filled. Now some of you might find this method easier than the method I showed you previously, but the reason why I don't use this is because your outline ends up becoming thicker than expected, and I personally do not like thicker outlines. I try my best as much as possible to make my lines as thin as I can. So it's just a matter of style. So look at this. For those of you who still don't understand the difference, this is basically what I'm trying to say. Now, because we have the outline here, when I draw a line, like let's say this is the eyes, I just pull this line from the eyebrows to the eyelids, then from the eyebrows to the eyelid, and I feel it. You see how easily it feels. Now in the previous shading method I was showing you, let me switch off this layer. In the previous shade, let me switch off it. This is what the shadow looks like. The shadow layer looks like. So if I'm going to switch on my outline now, let me reduce the outline opacity. You see that when I was trying to shade, I had to draw along the outlines just to close my shadows so that it doesn't leak outside. But this method I'm showing you does not require that, because it already has the outline. Look at it. This is what the shadow actually looks like. It captures the outline and everything as well. So when you feel it, it just feels. You don't need to draw lines at the back or something like that. I don't know, it's just hard for me to explain, but I know that most of you already understand what I'm trying to say. So this is a method that most people use, but I personally don't prefer that method. But now I'm starting to think it's actually a better method. So that's just another way to shade, but we don't need this again. So that's basically everything for shading and outlines. So in the next tutorial video, I'll be talking about coloring, and maybe I'll try as much as possible to see if I can cover highlights and things like blending. But with that said, thanks for watching the video up to this point. Thanks for tolerating my narration, and God bless you.